Today on the podcast, how fear hides in our relationships and what changes when we finally see it for what it actually is. A while ago, I got a text. A booking for an upcoming trip hadn't gone through. The place my partner really wanted to stay, the things she was most looking forward to doing on our trip were now gone. There were no good options left, and the date was coming up fast, and I knew she was going to be heartbroken. I knew she was going to ask why I'd waited so long to lock it in, and I did not want to have that conversation. And that flinch, that small voice saying, I don't want to deal with that. That's the fear I'm talking about today. It's usually not anything really big or noticeable or dramatic. It's usually just a voice nudging you to delay the conversation, to find a way to soften the truth, to pick a different fight, or just ignore whatever it is that you don't want to deal with altogether. This fear is exactly what can steer a relationship into chaos. And when it does once, it usually will happen over and over and over again. And learning to confront this kind of fear has been one of the hardest lessons I've had to learn in my own relationship. And when I'm not paying attention, I'll still do this. I'll still catch myself operating out of that kind of fear. And I know many men, even some of the best men that I know, suffer from this same thing. But if you've been stuck in a loop for a while now of having the same fight and missing your partner, frustrated and losing sight of why you're even here, why you're spending time doing what you're doing, this episode is for you. Because fear is almost always sitting right at the root of the problem. Stay with me. This is Reclaiming the Gentleman. I'm Dave Lashansky. Now, if you're like me, the voice telling you to avoid the hard conversation or deal with it later, if you're like me, that voice is probably pretty subtle at first. It usually sounds something like, I'll get to it. It's just not the right timing. Which, fair. Timing is essential, right? For so many hard conversations, timing matters a ton. But a lot of us, maybe even most of us, use timing as a scapegoat more often than actually serves us. Right? Most of us will put off a hard conversation or put off being proactive by telling ourselves that it's about waiting for the right moment. But really, deep down, we're just really hoping that the thing's going to resolve on its own. And the reason I want to make a whole episode about this phenomenon is that this strategy, waiting, hoping, avoiding, pretty much always makes things worse. Right? Waiting to bring up the things she said weeks ago that hurt. Waiting to tell her you're not actually okay with the plan you already said yes to. Waiting to ask for what you actually want in the bedroom. Waiting to admit that you're struggling at work or with money or in your own head. Because you're supposed to be the steady one, but she's just watching you get shorter and quieter and more checked out and hedging all the time, and she has to guess what's wrong, which ends up being worse than whatever it is you were trying to protect her from, always. Right? Waiting to plan the trip and book the hotel and make the reservation and send that text because you want to believe there's still time. But you end up being the guy delivering bad news you could have prevented a month ago if you'd just taken action. And here's the thing that all of these have in common. In every single one of them, the waiting feels like patience, feels like some kind of wisdom, feels like you're being strategic and picking your moment, feels like you're not being reactive. But if you're being honest, you know that you're not waiting for the right time. You're waiting for that discomfort to go away. And it won't. It almost never does. What actually happens is the thing gets bigger. The conversation gets harder. And the version of you that finally just rips off the Band-Aid and says or does whatever it is that you need to is the version of you that's more defensive, tired, and resentful than if you just did it a week ago or a month ago or the moment you first actually felt that desire to deal with it later. Now, the thing that I want to address in this, that hopefully is something that you can hold and keep with you when you're moving through your own life, is this. When you hear that voice inviting you to prioritize waiting over taking action, that voice usually stems from the sensations you feel in your body when you imagine taking the uncomfortable action. And most of us have this insane, amazing superpower where we can experientially vet a situation in our bodies in a split second. What I mean by that is most of us feel into or imagine into what it would be like to do the thing we don't want to do. And in a split second, right? It's not even really a full imagining, but in that split second where we think about doing the thing, we immediately understand that it will be way less comfortable in the moment to actually do that thing. Think about it like this. You have the thought, I should bring this up tonight. And before you've even finished that thought, your shoulders are tight and your jaw is clenched and your stomach is in knots. And you've already decided, just feeling into that saying the thing you don't want to say is a bad idea. And for the most part, the wild thing is, you probably didn't even notice that you decided not to do it. Right? Your body told you no before you could consciously choose it. And we get this message, which is actually pretty plainly fear, that says, that's probably not safe, probably not good, just wait on it. And whether or not that's true depends on how well attuned you can be to your own thoughts, to your own nervous system, and to your own habits. Because most of us start by doing that imagining and making that choice almost entirely unconsciously choosing to avoid the suffering and the hard thing by habit. And to be clear, it doesn't happen because you're bad. You don't unconsciously do this because you're bad or not good enough. This happens because the society so many of us were raised in taught us to do this, taught us to bypass our bodies and our needs entirely, which ends up meaning that everything that isn't imminently going to bring us something we want, money, status, sex, affection, if it's not going to bring us that right away, it's usually not going to get prioritized. And this is the trap that so many of us get stuck in. Because the more we make decisions based on factors that are just about bringing us comfort over growth, we make decisions that satisfy our immediate wants over our long-term needs and what's best for us, the more we will suffer in our relationships. The more we will avoid the very things that are going to help us most. But when we start to slow down our reactions, to notice those thoughts, those habits, to get quiet and go slow when we're dealing with a tough conversation or a situation with our partners especially, because every time we slow down enough to see it for what it is, it will call us into an opportunity to evolve ourselves for the better. When you gain the ability to slow down enough to feel that fear, to presence it in your system, to allow it to be there without trying to snuff it out or ignore it, without judging it, You gain the ability to channel fear into action, to be courageous, which most of the time probably doesn't feel all that heroic. Most of the time, it just looks like doing the small, uncomfortable thing a little bit sooner than the part of you that's afraid would like you to. Right? It looks like bringing up the thing that's been bugging you while it's still small, while you can talk about it without blaming her. Courage looks like saying, actually, I don't think that plan works for me right in the moment, kindly, instead of saying yes and resenting it later. That courage looks like asking for what you actually want and giving her the respect to make her own choice instead of protecting yourself from a no you haven't even gotten. Courage looks like telling her you're struggling with work, with money, with your own thoughts and feelings and emotions, and trusting her to meet you there instead of just going quiet and making her guess. Courage looks like apologizing for your part, giving up the need to be right because being close to her matters more than protecting your ego. And yes, it looks like sending the texts and making the booking and having the conversation you've been pushing to next week for 3 weeks now. Looks like being the guy who deals with it on a Tuesday instead of the guy delivering bad news on a Friday. None of that is dramatic. It doesn't feel heroic. But it is going to feel uncomfortable. It is going to feel like another priority on your long list of important priorities. But that is the whole point. Courage in a relationship almost never feels like courage from the inside. It feels like doing the thing you didn't want to do a little sooner than the part of you that's afraid would prefer. And look, I'll tell you how the trip booking thing actually went, because in the end, I sat Vanna down and I told her what happened. I owned that I delayed, that it was my fault we weren't going to go and do the thing we'd both been looking forward to. And you know what? She was totally fine with it. I'd spent days imagining her blaming me and shaming me and listing all the reasons I should have handled it sooner. And instead, she just said she wanted to spend time with me. That we'd find another way to spend that time and that it was all okay. But that fear inside of me, while I was stewing on it, while I was not taking action, while I was avoiding that conversation, never let me see that her reaction was even possible, right? The fear in me told me I'd failed and that the worst was coming. But the worst wasn't coming. And it almost never is. And the beautiful thing is that every single time you do this, every single time you take action where previously you delay or procrastinate, you're teaching your nervous system something new. You're teaching your nervous system that it can feel the fear and move anyway. That you can be uncomfortable and not die. That you can have the hard conversation and still be loved on the other side of it. In fact, feel even closer to her because of it. And slowly over time, the voice that says, wait, gets quieter. Not because the fear goes away, right? It doesn't, not really, but because you stop letting that fear drive. Because in the end, courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is having fear, but taking action anyway. Because something is more important than the fear. Whatever is moving you toward taking action in love is a powerful, righteous pursuit, and I wish you all the best in it. If you want help building the muscle to actually do this in real time, to catch the flinch before it makes the decision for you, I would love for you to come to a free workshop that I'm hosting for men on April 11th and April 14th. We're going to talk about exactly how to take action, how to cultivate these skills inside of you of noticing what's happening in your body, of taking action, of learning from other men and being in the work with other men too. It is an essential part of the journey. And if this is something you are seeking in your life, you can go to painfreeconflict.lovable.app. I'll put a link in the show notes, and I'll be sharing some of the most powerful strategies that men I work with have used to regain their agency, their clarity, and their self-respect in relationships. Wherever this finds you, I'm wishing you a beautiful day or night. I'll be back in a week.